There is a small group of strange metals, 17 of them, with names most people have never heard, like neodymium, dysprosium, and terbium. You will never see them, you will never touch them knowingly, and yet you cannot live your modern life without them. They are inside the phone in your pocket, the electric car in your driveway, the wind turbine on the hill, and the fighter jet that defends your country. They are called rare earths, and here is the fact that should stop you cold. One single country controls them almost completely. It is not America, and it is not some neutral supplier. It is China, and in the year 2025, China stopped simply selling these metals to the world and started using them as a weapon, aimed straight at the heart of Western industry and Western defense. Tonight, I am going to show you how China quietly cornered the most strategically important materials on the planet, why the West cannot easily break free, and how China just turned one of the West's own favorite weapons around and pointed it right back. Let me start with what these metals actually do, because the danger is invisible until you understand it. The most important thing rare earths give us is magnets, but not the weak fridge magnets you are picturing. Rare earth magnets are the most powerful permanent magnets ever created, and they are the hidden muscle inside almost every modern machine. Every electric car motor spins because of them. Every wind turbine generates power because of them. They are in the tiny motors that make your phone vibrate, in hard drives, in robots, in headphones, and they are absolutely critical to the military. The magnets made from these metals are inside fighter jets, inside submarines, inside guided missiles and drones and radar systems. A single advanced warplane can contain hundreds of kilograms of rare earth materials. Without them, huge parts of the modern world, civilian and military, simply stop working. They are not a nice to have. They are the foundation. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable for the West, and where China's genius and its patience really show. When people hear rare earths, they assume the problem is the mining, that China must be sitting on all the deposits. That is not really the story. These metals are actually scattered all over the world, and China does only around 60 to 70% of the mining. The real chokehold is not digging them out of the ground. It is refining them. Turning that raw ore into pure, usable metal is a fiendishly difficult, dirty, and polluting process, and this is the part almost nobody in the West wanted to do. So for decades, the West happily let China take on that filthy, low-glamour work, seeing it as a dirty job for a developing country. And while the West looked down on it, China quietly built a near-total monopoly on it. Today, China refines around 90% of the world's rare earths, and it manufactures more than 90% of the world's high-performance rare earth magnets. And when it comes to the rarest and most valuable of these metals, the heavy rare earths like dysprosium and terbium that the best magnets and the best weapons absolutely require, China's control is close to a monopoly. The West did not lose this game recently. It handed China the board, one dirty job at a time, over 30 years. There is a famous line that tells you just how deliberate this was. Decades ago, China's leader Deng Xiaoping reportedly said that the Middle East has oil, but China has rare earths. He saw, long before the West ever did, that these obscure metals could one day become as strategically powerful as petroleum, and China set out, on purpose, to control them. Its method was ruthless and effective. Chinese producers, backed by the state and unburdened by strict environmental rules, refined these metals so cheaply that they simply undercut everyone else on Earth. Western refineries could not compete on price, and they closed down one by one. America's own flagship rare earth mine went bankrupt, and at one point actually shipped its raw ore all the way to China for processing because there was nowhere else left to send it. That is how total the surrender was. The West did not just lose the lead, it dismantled its own ability to compete and mailed the pieces to Beijing. If you want to understand where the real leverage in the world economy is hidden, the pressure points most people never see, then subscribe to Sinova, because finding those hidden choke points before they get used is exactly what this channel is for. Now let me show you what China did with all that quiet power, because this is the part that changed everything. For years, China's dominance sat there like a loaded weapon that was never fired. Everyone knew it existed, but China kept selling the metals to everyone, and the world got comfortable. And the world should have known better, because China had already fired one warning shot years earlier. Back in 2010, China got into a bitter territorial dispute with Japan, and it quietly choked off Japan's supply of rare earths almost overnight. Japanese industry, utterly dependent on those metals, was thrown into a panic, and the global price of rare earths briefly exploded. It was a naked demonstration of exactly this power, a preview of everything to come, delivered a decade and a half in advance. Japan learned its lesson and spent years reducing its dependence. But the rest of the West watched that crisis, shrugged, and went right back to buying cheap Chinese metal, because it was easier. China had shown the whole world the loaded weapon, out in the open. The West simply chose not to believe it would ever be pointed at them. Then the trade war over chips escalated. America tightened its ban on selling advanced technology to China, squeezing harder and harder. And China finally reached for the one lever it had spent decades building. In 2025, it began restricting the export of rare earths and the magnets made from them, and the effect was immediate and brutal. Automakers around the world suddenly could not get the magnets they needed, and warned of factories grinding to a halt. Defense contractors, the companies that build the West's most advanced weapons, were suddenly staring at a supply line that ran straight through Beijing, and it was tightening. But the truly stunning move, the one that made strategists around the world sit up, came at the end of the year, and you need to understand it, because it is a kind of poetic justice. For decades, the United States has used a powerful trick to enforce its own bans. It is called the Foreign Direct Product Rule, and it says that if a product made anywhere in the world contains even a tiny amount of American technology, America can control whether it is allowed to be sold. Washington used this exact rule to strangle China's access to chips. And in late 2025, China turned around and used the very same weapon. It declared that any product, made anywhere on Earth, that contains even a trace of Chinese rare earths, or that was made using Chinese processing technology, now needs China's permission to be sold. Read that again. China took the precise legal weapon America invented to choke China's chip industry and aimed it back at the entire world's supply of these critical metals. It was a mirror held up to Washington, and the reflection said, "We can play this game too." And rare earths are only the most famous item on a much longer list. China also dominates the supply of a whole basket of other critical materials the modern world quietly runs on. Gallium and germanium for chips and lasers, graphite for the batteries in every electric car, tungsten for cutting tools and armor, antimony for ammunition and semiconductors. And over the last few years, one by one, China has begun restricting the export of these too. It is not a single lever, it is an entire keyboard of pressure points, and China's hands are resting on all of them at once. When Western leaders talk tough about cutting China out of advanced technology, this is the quiet reality sitting underneath the table. China can answer almost any move by squeezing one of the raw materials the West cannot easily get anywhere else on the planet. The chip ban was one weapon. China spent 30 years building a dozen. Here is the rehook, the thing to hold on to. This is not really a story about metals. It is a story about leverage, and about who was patient enough to build it. The West spent years searching for China's weak point, and it found one, the machine that makes advanced chips, and it squeezed. What the West did not fully appreciate is that while it was building its chokehold on chips, China had already spent 30 years building an even deeper chokehold on the physical materials that chips, and cars, and missiles, and the entire modern world are made from. So now, every time the West tightens the screws on China's access to technology, China can tighten the screws right back on the West's access to the raw materials that make technology possible. Two hands around two throats. That is the real balance of power that just revealed itself, and almost nobody saw it coming. And the danger to the West here is not abstract. It lands directly on national security. The most advanced weapons in the Western arsenal, the stealth fighters, the nuclear submarines, the guided missiles, all depend on magnets that, right now, can only be made in quantity in China or from materials China refines. Imagine trying to build the weapons meant to counter a rival using materials you can only get from that same rival. That is the corner the West has quietly backed itself into, and it took a crisis in 2025 for the full weight of it to finally sink in. A single advanced stealth fighter is reported to contain something on the order of 400 kilograms of these materials, and nearly all of it traces back, one way or another, to Chinese refineries. Now, I promised you honesty, so let me be clear about the limits of China's power here, because the picture is not one-sided. China's chokehold is real, but it is not permanent, and using it as a weapon carries a cost for China too. The moment China started restricting these metals, it lit a fire under the entire Western world to break free. Governments are now pouring billions into building their own mines and, more importantly, their own refining plants. They are setting guaranteed prices to make Western production profitable, striking deals with allies like Australia and Japan, and standing up new magnet factories. In America, the government has gone as far as taking a direct financial stake in its one major rare earth company and guaranteeing a floor price for the metals, so that Chinese producers can no longer simply crush every Western rival by dropping their prices the moment one appears. Australia's big producer is racing to build the first heavy rare earth refining anywhere outside China. It is a genuine, serious effort, the most serious in decades, but every expert who studies this agrees on the timeline. Standing up a full supply chain, from the mine to the refined metal to the finished magnet, takes many years, not months, and the hardest link, the refining, is exactly the one China guards most jealously. So the West is finally running hard, but it is running from a very long way back. And here is the deeper truth. Because these metals are not actually geologically rare, the West absolutely can rebuild this supply chain. It will just take years, and a lot of money, and the stomach to do the dirty processing work it once pushed away. China also knows that squeezing too hard, for too long, only speeds up its own replacement, which is why it has sometimes eased the controls as a bargaining chip rather than a permanent blockade. So this is leverage, powerful and real, but it is a lever with a time limit, not a permanent stranglehold. Even so, step back and see the lesson, because it is the whole story of this new era in one image. For 30 years, the West chased the glamorous, high-margin, clean parts of technology, the designs, the software, the brands, and it happily handed off the dirty, unglamorous physical work of digging and refining to China, certain that the real value lived in the ideas. China took the dirty work and quietly turned it into the ultimate source of power, because in the end, ideas still have to be built out of something real, and China made sure it controlled the something real. The West owned the blueprint. China came to own the bricks. And when the fight finally got serious, it turned out the country holding the bricks had far more leverage than anyone in the West had ever bothered to imagine. So the next time you hear about a shiny new Western breakthrough, a new chip, a new weapon, a new electric car, remember to ask the quiet question that actually decides these things. What is it made of, and who controls that? Because on the answer to that question, across the materials that the entire modern world depends on, the reply keeps coming back the same. China does. If you want to keep uncovering these hidden choke points, the ones that decide far more than the headlines ever admit, then subscribe to Sinova, and the next time someone tells you the West holds all the cards in this contest, you can quietly remind them who has been holding the raw materials all along.